Hello, welcome back to Histamine Health Coach. I'm Teresa, and I help women live well with histamine intolerance. Today, we're talking about the difference between true food allergies, food intolerances, and everyday food choices that often get mistaken for both. When my husband and I lived in Chicago, we had a favorite Mexican restaurant. It was one of those white tablecloth places that I like to refer to as fancy Mexican. When I was really in the thick of navigating histamine intolerance, I would often call ahead and speak with the restaurant manager about some of my limitations. I had a short list of foods that usually worked for me, and they were always very kind about accommodating it. One evening, we were sitting there having dinner when a young couple was seated at the table next to us. When the server came to take their order, I heard the woman ask if a particular dish was gluten-free. The server said no, and she said something that really surprised me. She was like, "That's okay, I'll eat it anyway." I remember sitting there thinking, wait, what? It surprised me so much that later that night I went home and actually ranted about it on Facebook. Not because she chose to eat gluten, that's her choice, and I have no opinions on that, but because it highlights something that creates a lot of confusion in restaurants and in healthcare. People use the words allergy, intolerance, and sometimes even diet preferences almost interchangeably. And the reality is, those things are very different. I've had waitstaff ask me before if cross-contamination is okay when I mention my quote-unquote allergy to mushrooms. Technically, mushrooms are an intolerance for me, not an allergy. But I also know that they make me itch. And if you know how that feels, you understand why I consider it an allergy. So, when I'm in a restaurant and the server asks about any allergies, I, and generally other people dining with me, will chime in with mushrooms because that communicates the seriousness of the reaction. Interestingly enough, I've had formal allergy testing done and I don't actually have any true food allergies. But like many people with histamine issues or mast cell activation, there are still times when my bucket overflows. When that happens, I might experiment with taking dairy or wheat out of my diet for a short time to see if symptoms settle down. Sometimes it's necessary to go back and look at the pattern of overindulgence I've been going through too. So where do we draw the line? When is something a food allergy? When is it a food intolerance? And when is it simply a dietary choice or a food trend? Because when fad diets and intolerances still give us choices, when it comes to food allergies, true food allergies, there really isn't a choice at all. And understanding that difference can change how you approach food symptoms and your health. So today, let's talk about the differences between food allergies and food intolerances and why the distinction matters. So let's start with the clearest category. A true food allergy involves the immune system. When someone with a food allergy eats that food, the immune system identifies a protein in the food as dangerous and releases antibodies called IgE antibodies. That reaction triggers the release of chemicals like histamine, and the symptoms can happen very quickly. Within minutes, someone might experience things like hives, swelling of the lips and throat, vomiting, difficult breathing, or even anaphylaxis. This is why people with severe allergies carry epinephrine, or an EpiPen, because a true allergy can be life-threatening. Another important feature of food allergies is that they are usually very consistent. If someone is allergic to peanuts, peanuts will trigger the reaction every time. There isn't really a situation where someone says, "Peanuts are fine today, but next week they might bother me." That kind of variability is usually a clue that something else is happening. And this is where a lot of confusion begins, because many people experience real symptoms after eating certain foods, but those symptoms don't behave like a true allergy. They may appear hours later. They may depend on how much of the food was eaten. And sometimes the same food causes a reaction one day, but not the next. When this happens, we're usually looking at something different. Not an allergy, but an unpredictable, ever-changing intolerance. So how does this differ from histamine intolerance? Now this is where things get interesting, because histamine is actually involved in both situations, but for very different reasons. As we just talked about, a true food allergy triggers the immune system to see a food protein as a threat. It activates IgE antibodies and releases histamine as part of the immune response. That histamine release is what creates symptoms like hives, swelling, and trouble breathing. In that case, histamine is being actively reduced by the immune system. Histamine intolerance is different. In that situation, the issue isn't usually the immune system attacking the food. Instead, the body is struggling to break down the histamine that already exists. Many foods naturally contain histamine. Others trigger mast cells to release histamine. And normally, the body uses enzymes, particularly DAO and HNMT, to break the histamine down and keep things balanced. But if histamine builds up faster than the body can clear it, symptoms begin to appear. This is why people with histamine intolerance often describe the symptoms as unpredictable. A food might feel fine one day and cause symptoms the next. Because the reaction isn't just about a single food, it's about the total histamine load in the body at that moment. This is what many people refer to as the histamine bucket. Sleep, stress, hormones, environmental exposures, and certain foods can all add to that histamine bucket. And when your bucket is full, it begins to overflow and symptoms appear. So, unlike a true allergy, histamine intolerance often involves patterns, timing, and cumulative effect, not a single immediate immune reaction. So, if allergies and intolerances are different things, why do we hear people say, I am allergic to that so often? In many cases, it's simply the easiest way to communicate that something causes a reaction. If you're in a restaurant and you say, I have an intolerance to mushrooms, there is a good chance it won't carry the same weight as saying, I'm allergic to mushrooms. And for many people, they've learned that using the word allergy is the quickest way to make sure their request is taken seriously. But there are also other reasons this confusion happens. Over the past couple of decades, we've seen a lot of popular diets that encourage people to remove certain foods, things like gluten, dairy, or sugar. Gluten-free and paleo menus are usually available upon request at lots of restaurants. Sometimes you just need to ask. And these special diets work because at times people do discover that they feel better without a certain food, and that's valuable information. But feeling better without a food doesn't necessarily mean there's a true allergy. It may be an intolerance, maybe a sensitivity, or it may simply be that the body functions better when that food isn't eaten in large amounts. Another reason the lines blur is because symptoms from intolerances can still feel very real. Things like itching, headaches, bloating, fatigue, and flushing. Those symptoms matter even if they aren't coming from a true immune allergy. And sometimes people use the word allergy because they're trying to explain something that has been difficult to figure out. This is something I see often with clients. When we first start working together, I'll ask if they have any known food allergies. Most of the time the answer is no. But a few sessions later, when we're talking about food that triggers symptoms, usually I hear things like, I'm allergic to eggs, I'm allergic to tomatoes, I'm allergic to gluten. What we usually discover together is that many of those reactions behave more like intolerances or histamine responses, not true allergies. And that distinction matters, not because one is more legitimate than the other, but because understanding the type of reaction helps you make better decisions about how to manage it. So, when we come back to the original question, where do we draw the line? A helpful way to think about this is a food allergy is an immune response. A food intolerance is how the body processes a food. And with histamine intolerance, it's often about the total load your body is carrying. All three can create very real symptoms, but they are not the same. And understanding the difference can change how you approach food completely. Because if everything is labeled as an allergy, it can lead to more and more restriction. more fear around foods, and less confidence in your body. Whereas when you begin to understand why your body is reacting, you can start to make more thoughtful decisions. You can experiment, you can observe patterns, and you can begin to rebuild a sense of stability. This is something I talk about often. Living well with histamine intolerance isn't just about removing foods, it's about understanding your body, your patterns, and your thresholds, and learning how to support your system so that everything feels a little more predictable and a lot more manageable. Because not every reaction means a food has to be gone forever, and not every symptom is an allergy. Sometimes it's simply your body asking for a different kind of support. And if your body is asking for that support, this is what I do every day. I help women live well with histamine intolerance without fear and without over restriction. I'd love to share my free guide, Living Well with Histamine Intolerance, with you. Just email me at teresa@histaminehealthcoach.com with the word support, and I'll personally write you back and send it to you. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind to yourself, and keep listening to your body. Have a great day, everyone.